My daughter-in-law said, "Just rest here, Dad. We'll handle the paperwork and come get you." That was 3 hours ago. I'm still sitting in this hospital corridor, my wallet gone, my phone dead, and not a single nurse who knows my name. But what none of them knew was that the morning she handed me those pills, I hadn't swallowed them. I'd held them under my tongue until she turned away. And what I heard through the cracked door of her office that afternoon, that changed everything. Let me tell you how it started. My name isn't important right now. What matters is that I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a structural engineer in Raleigh, North Carolina, and until about 14 months ago, I believed my son had married the best woman he'd ever met. Her name was Nadette. That's what everyone called her, though her full name was something longer and more formal that she only used on legal documents. She came into our lives 6 years ago, quiet, careful, always saying the right thing at the right moment. She remembered my late wife's birthday. She brought me soup when I had a bad knee. When my son, my only child, stood next to her at the altar at that small church off Glenwood Avenue, I thought, he found someone good. He really did. My wife, Carolyn, died in 2019. Heart failure. It was fast, the way these things sometimes are. They're one Tuesday, gone by Thursday. Nadette was at our house within an hour of me calling my son. She organized the catering for the reception. She handled the thank you cards. She told me not to worry about anything. I didn't. That was my first mistake. About 8 months after Carolyn died, I started forgetting things, small things at first. Where I'd put my reading glasses, whether I'd lock the back door. I'd drive to the hardware store on Hillsborough Street and sit in the parking lot for a moment, not quite sure why I'd come. I told my son about it one Sunday when we had dinner at their house. Nadette was in the kitchen. She came to the doorway and said, very gently, that she'd been noticing the same thing, that she'd done some reading, that it sounded like it could be early onset dementia. My son looked at her. Then he looked at me. His expression was something between concern and relief, like he'd been waiting for someone to name the thing he'd been afraid of. Nadette said she had a friend, a doctor who worked out of a small private practice off Six Forks Road. She said he was discreet, thorough, and that she'd already mentioned my situation to him. She could get me an appointment by the end of the week. I went. The doctor, a quiet man named Dr. Vance, whom I'd never heard of before and couldn't find listed anywhere when I looked him up later, sat across from me with a yellow legal pad and asked questions for 40 minutes. Then he said he thought the cognitive decline was consistent with early Alzheimer's. He said we'd start with a low-dose medication to slow the progression. He said it was good we'd caught it early. Nadette filled the prescription that afternoon, a small white pill, oval-shaped. Every morning she'd set it next to my orange juice when she came to check on me. She'd started coming by my house 3 mornings a week after Carolyn passed. I thought it was kindness. For the first 2 months, the pills seemed to do nothing. Then things got worse. I started sleeping 11, 12 hours a day. I'd wake up and the morning felt like wading through something thick, like the air itself had weight. My son would call, and I'd forget what we'd been talking about mid-sentence. I stopped driving, stopped going to the church I'd attended for 20 years. I couldn't find the words for things I'd known my whole life. Nadette started coming every day. She'd bring me breakfast, sit with me for an hour, make sure I took my pill. She started talking about my finances. Gently, the way she did everything. She said I really should think about getting my accounts organized. That it would be so much easier for my son, for everyone, if things were simplified. She mentioned a financial advisor she trusted. She mentioned that it might be wise to update my will. I had the house, paid off, worth just under $400,000. Retirement accounts from 30 years of working. A small brokerage account Carol and I had built together. In total, somewhere around $800,000. I didn't think about that number then. I wasn't thinking clearly about much of anything. My daughter Fen, my son's older sister, 22 years old when I had my son, now 45, and living in Portland, Oregon. She came to visit in October. I hadn't seen her in almost a year. She stood in my kitchen doorway and looked at me the way you look at something that doesn't match the picture you had in your memory. She said, "Dad, you seem different." I told her about the diagnosis, about the pills. She asked to see them. I showed her the bottle. She photographed the label, turned it over in her hands. She didn't say anything else that night. The next morning early, before Nadette arrived, Fen sat across from me at the kitchen table with her laptop open. She'd looked up the medication. She'd looked up Dr. Vance. She read me what she found. The drug on the label was a sedative, not an Alzheimer's medication. And Dr. Vance's license had been suspended 2 years earlier for improper prescription practices. I stared at her. She said very quietly, "Dad, I don't think you have Alzheimer's." I didn't say anything. The fog in my head was still there, heavy and familiar. But something else was there too, something thin and cold cutting through it. Fen stayed 5 days. She didn't tell my son she was there. On the third day, she drove me to Rex Hospital and paid out of pocket for a full cognitive workup with a neurologist she found independently. A woman named Dr. Prasad, practicing for 26 years with offices on Blue Ridge Road. I sat in that exam room for 2 hours. Dr. Prasad was thorough and careful. She spoke to me like I was a person, not a chart. Her conclusion: no evidence of Alzheimer's disease. No evidence of any dementia. What she found was consistent with prolonged use of a benzodiazepine sedative at an above therapeutic dose. She said if I stopped taking the medication, I would likely improve within days. I sat in her office and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Clarity. Not complete, not sharp, but a beginning of it. Like light coming through a window you'd forgotten was there. Fen and I didn't go home right away. We sat in the car in the hospital parking lot, the November afternoon going gray around us. She held my hand. I asked her what she thought this meant. She said she thought it meant Nadette had been poisoning me. We didn't tell my son. Not yet. Fen said we needed to understand the full picture first. She said she'd been noticing things for a while. Small financial comments Nadette made, questions about the will, the way she'd inserted herself into every corner of my life after Carolyn died. She said she hadn't said anything because she hadn't wanted to cause problems. She hadn't wanted to be the daughter who made trouble. I told her she should have said something. She said she knew. And she started to cry, there in that parking lot, in a way that told me she'd been holding this for a long time. I stopped taking the pills that day. I didn't tell Nadette. Every morning when she set the pill next to my juice, I palmed it, waited until she looked away, and slipped it into my shirt pocket. Within 4 days, the fog began to lift. Not all at once, but steadily, the way a morning burns off ground fog on a clear day. I started remembering things. I started noticing things. I noticed that a joint account had been added to my checking 6 months earlier, with my son's name on it. I noticed that a meeting had been scheduled with an estate attorney. Nadette had put it in my phone calendar for the following month. I noticed that when I looked at my brokerage statement, there had been 2 withdrawal inquiries that I had no memory of initiating. I started writing things down. In a small green notebook I kept at the back of my sock drawer, the one place in my house I was certain Nadette had never gone. I wrote dates. I wrote what I observed. I wrote the names of the medications, the name of Dr. Vance, the details of every financial conversation Nadette had initiated in the past year. I wrote it all down while my head was clear enough to do it, because some part of me understood that the clarity might not last, that something might happen to me before I could use it. What I didn't know was that something was about to happen a great deal sooner than I expected. 3 weeks after I stopped taking the pills, my son called. He said he and Nadette thought it might be good for me to see a specialist, a facility in Scottsdale, Arizona, a place that dealt with memory care and cognitive support. He said Nadette had done a lot of research. He said the climate would be good for me. He said they'd come pick me up Saturday morning and drive me to the airport. I said that sounded fine. I called Fen that night. She flew back from Portland on Friday. Saturday morning, my son arrived with Nadette. Fen had parked 2 streets over and was waiting. My green notebook was in the inside pocket of my jacket. I was calm. I had not taken a pill in 23 days. At the airport, Raleigh-Durham, my son pulled the car to the departure curb. He and Nadette got out and started pulling bags from the trunk. I counted 2 bags, not 3. Nadette had my wallet. She'd taken it from the kitchen counter that morning. Said she'd hold the documents so nothing got lost. I didn't have my phone. The battery had died in the car and she'd offered to charge it in her bag. My son put his hand on my shoulder. He said, "Just wait here on the bench, Dad. We'll check in and come right back for you." I sat on the bench. They walked through the sliding doors. I watched through the glass as they moved toward the check-in counters. 2 bags. My son, Nadette, and nobody else. No ticket for me, no bag for me. I sat for 20 minutes. Then I walked to the information desk inside and asked a woman there. Her name tag said Coretta, and she had the look of someone who'd seen every possible kind of human situation and wasn't going to be surprised by any of them, whether 2 passengers had checked in for a flight to Phoenix. She looked it up. Yes, she said. 2 passengers. My son's name and Nadette's, not mine. I told her what had happened. I told her I had no wallet, no phone, no ticket, no luggage. I told her my daughter-in-law had been giving me sedatives and calling them Alzheimer's medication. I told her about the fake doctor. Coretta looked at me for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and called someone. Within 15 minutes, I was sitting in a back office with a TSA supervisor named Agent Dunphy, a compact, serious man in his mid-40s, and an airport paramedic who'd come to check my vitals. I showed them the green notebook. I showed them the photographs Fenn had taken of the medication bottle. I gave them Dr. Prasad's name. Agent Dunphy asked if there was someone who could come to the airport. I told him about Fenn. He made the call. She was there in 12 minutes. While we waited for her, Agent Dunphy contacted TSA at the gate. My son and Nadette had not yet boarded. They were detained at gate C14 for questioning. My son called the medic's cell. They'd taken my number from the booking system, and when Agent Dunphy answered and told him what was happening, there was a long silence on the line. Then my son said, in a voice I barely recognized, that he could explain, that this was a misunderstanding, that I was confused and had wandered from where they'd left me. Dunphy said quietly and clearly that I hadn't wandered anywhere, that I was sitting right here, that I'd like a word with him. My son didn't come back through security. Fenn arrived. She held me for a long time. Then she sat down across from Agent Dunphy and started talking. What came out over the following days was not simple. My son, it turned out, had been in serious financial trouble for over a year. A business venture that had collapsed, loans he'd taken quietly, credit cards maxed out in amounts that had kept him awake at night for months. Nadette knew. Nadette had, in fact, been the one managing the strategy, the doctor, the pills, the slow establishment of my apparent incompetence, the financial accounts placed in position for access. When the plan had advanced far enough, the goal had been to have me placed in a facility where I could be managed from a distance while my assets were liquidated, the house sold, the accounts accessed, the money moved. My son had gone along with it. He told himself I was genuinely declining. He told himself this was mercy. He was afraid to look too closely at what he actually knew. Fenn found a lawyer, a woman named Ms. Ostro, who practiced elder law out of a small firm on Hillsborough Street, not a quarter mile from the hardware store where I used to park and forget why I'd come. Ms. Ostro had been doing this work for 18 years, and she had the efficient, unhurried manner of someone who knows exactly what she's looking at. She looked at the notebook. She looked at Dr. Prasad's report. She looked at the bank records Fenn had subpoenaed with the help of a financial investigator, Ms. Ostro kept on retainer. She said, "This is elder financial abuse, fraud, conspiracy, and potentially more." She said she was going to make some calls. The calls she made included one to a detective with the Wake County Sheriff's Office who handled elder abuse cases. His name was Detective Brascom. He was a quiet man who wrote everything down by hand and asked questions in the same careful, unhurried sequence, like he'd given this particular interview 1,000 times and knew exactly where the important parts were buried. He asked me to walk him through everything from the beginning. I did. When I got to the part about the green notebook, he asked if he could have it photographed. I handed it to him. He turned it over carefully, the way you handle something that matters. 3 days after the airport, Nadette was arrested at the house she shared with my son. My son turned himself in the following morning. He sat in an interview room and answered every question Detective Brascom asked. His lawyer was there, but my son did not use the lawyer as a shield. He talked. He told the detective about the pills, about the fake diagnosis, about the financial planning. He cried at one point, which Detective Brascom noted in his file and did not comment on. What the detective's investigation uncovered in the following weeks was something that took the breath out of me when I heard it. Nadette's first husband, a man from Greensboro she'd married in her early 30s, had died in 2017, ruled a natural death. Cardiac event, no autopsy requested by the family because there was no family to request it, his relatives being estranged and Nadette being the sole next of kin. He'd had a modest life insurance policy and a small house. She'd inherited both. Her mother-in-law from that marriage, a woman who'd been suspicious of Nadette from the beginning, had filed a complaint with Greensboro police in 2018. Inadequate evidence. The case had been filed away. I thought about Carolyn, about the soup Nadette brought when I had my bad knee, about her being at our house within an hour of Carolyn dying. I didn't say anything to Fenn about that thought. Not right away. But 3 days later, I asked Ms. Ostro if there was a way to request an independent review of Carolyn's death. Ms. Ostro looked at me for a moment. Then she said she would make a call. Carolyn's case was reopened. I won't pretend I understood everything the medical examiner found. I'm not a doctor. But what I was told, carefully and clearly, by the examiner assigned to the review, was that the toxicology indicators present in tissue samples were inconsistent with the cardiac event originally documented. They were consistent with a sedative compound administered at a level that would have suppressed cardiac function in someone with Carolyn's existing mild heart irregularity. He said she may not have died naturally. I sat with Fen in the examiner's waiting room when we got that news. She held my hand. Neither of us cried right away. We just sat there in the particular silence of people learning something they had already half known and had hoped would stay half known forever. Then Fen cried. Then I did. Carolyn had been trying to tell me something in the last weeks before she died. She'd been quieter than usual, watchful. She'd said once, in the kitchen, that she felt like something was off in the house. I'd thought she meant the plumbing. She sometimes meant things like that, concrete and practical. But she'd looked at me in a way that was different, and I hadn't asked her what she meant, and she hadn't said more. And 3 days later she was gone. I've thought about that look a lot. I think I always will. Detective Brascombe was given the new evidence. He added it to the file. Nadette was already in custody. The charges expanded. Through all of this, I had not spoken directly to my son. He'd tried to call twice from the detention center. I'd let both calls go to voicemail and hadn't listened to them. Fen thought I should eventually hear him out. She said it quietly, not pushing, the way she handles things she knows I need time for. Ms. Ostro told me that my son had been fully cooperative, that he'd agreed to testify against Nadette in exchange for a reduced sentence. She said the DA was satisfied with the scope of his cooperation. She said she thought, from a legal standpoint, the case against Nadette was strong. I asked her what she thought would happen. She said she thought Nadette was going away for a very long time. 2 months later, I accepted the call from my son. He was sitting in a phone room at the Wake County Detention Center. I could hear the ambient noise behind him, the particular institutional flatness of it. He looked older on the screen. He'd lost weight. When he saw my face, he pressed his lips together for a moment, and I could see him trying to hold himself together. He didn't make excuses. That surprised me. I'd expected something more like justification, some architecture of reasoning that would let him be both guilty and understandable at the same time. Instead, he said he'd spent the past 2 months trying to understand what kind of person does what he did. He said he didn't have a clean answer. He said he knew that Carolyn would not have recognized him, and that understanding had been harder than anything else. I told him I wasn't ready to forgive him, that I didn't know if I ever would be, fully, but that I didn't want to spend whatever years I had left carrying this like a stone. He nodded. He said he understood. He said he was sorry about his mother. He said that one was on him, that he'd known Carolyn didn't trust Nadette, that Carolyn had tried to tell him something once, and he hadn't listened, and that he would have to live with that. I ended the call after 17 minutes. I sat in the guest room at Fenn's rented house in Raleigh, where I'd been staying since the airport, and I looked out the window at a dogwood tree that was just beginning to bud in the February cold. I felt tired. Not the medicated tiredness, the thick fog I'd been living in for over a year. This was a different kind, the tiredness of someone who had carried something very heavy for a very long way. Fen knocked on the door. She came in and sat on the edge of the bed and asked how it went. I told her. She was quiet for a while. Then she said she was thinking about moving back to Raleigh. Not permanently, maybe, but for a while. She said she'd been working remotely for 3 years, and there was no real reason she had to be in Portland. She said she thought I could use some company that wasn't a lawyer or a detective. I looked at her, this daughter I'd somehow never given enough credit to, who'd shown up and seen what everyone else had missed. I said I thought that sounded like a good idea. The trial came in the fall. I testified for just over an hour. I had worried about it in the months leading up to it, that I would lose my composure or my nerve, that standing in a courtroom and saying these things out loud would be too much. But when the moment came, I was calm. Not the calm of someone who doesn't feel anything, the calm of someone who has already done the hardest work, who has already sat with the worst of it, and who knows now with certainty what is true. I told the court about the pills, about the 14 months of fog, About the green notebook and the dogwood tree and Coretta at the information desk, and Dr. Prasad's careful voice telling me there was nothing wrong with my mind that a few weeks of proper rest wouldn't begin to repair. I told them about Carolyn. When I said Carolyn's name, Nadette, seated at the defense table in a gray jacket, did not look at me. She looked at the table. She had the flat, managed expression of someone who has decided not to give anything away. But when the verdict came, when the four persons stood and read the first count, I watched her face and I saw something, briefly, that no amount of management could contain. The expression of someone who has finally run out of room. Guilty on all counts. Attempted murder, elder financial abuse, fraud, conspiracy, and the expanded charges related to Carolyn's death and the death of her first husband. The judge sentenced her to 42 years without possibility of parole. My son received 8 years. He will be 61 when he is released, if he serves the full term. He is cooperating with an ongoing investigation into the network of contacts Nadette used to obtain the medication and the fraudulent documentation. Detective Brascom told me they believe she had done this before, that there may be other victims whose families don't yet know what happened to them. He said the investigation would continue. I go back to my house now. Not every day yet, but more often than I did. I sit on the back porch in the evenings and watch the light go off the yard, and sometimes I talk to Carolyn. Not in any way I could explain to a stranger. Just in the way that people who have loved someone for a long time sometimes still address the space they used to fill. I told her we figured it out, that it took too long, and I'm sorry it took too long, but we figured it out. Fen is staying in the house down the street, a rental she found on the north side of Raleigh, close enough that she walks over most mornings. She's started a small nonprofit, just getting it off the ground, focused on elder abuse awareness in the Carolinas. Ms. Ostro is on the board. Dr. Prasad came to the first meeting. There were 14 people in the room, half of them with their own stories, and I listened to all of them. I told mine, too. The whole thing, from the beginning, from the fog and the pills and the bench at the airport. I told it without flinching, because I've learned that the story only has power if you tell it clearly. And the point of telling it isn't to make people feel sorry for you. The point is to make them look up, to make them notice the things at the edge of their vision that they've been letting themselves not quite see. Carolyn noticed. She tried to tell me. I didn't listen in time. But you can. If something feels wrong, if your medication appears without you remembering asking for it, if someone you trust starts asking about your accounts, if the fog won't lift, say something. Write it down. Call the person you trust most, even if you haven't spoken in a year, even if you're afraid of making trouble. You're not making trouble. You're saving your life. And if you're watching this because someone you love seems different, seems quieter, seems less like themselves, ask. Push a little. Be willing to hear something you don't want to hear. I know it's hard. I know it's easier to believe the explanation you're given. But I'm standing here because my daughter didn't take the easy explanation. She drove to Rex Hospital and sat in that waiting room and paid out of pocket for the truth. That's all it took. One person willing to look directly at the thing. Be that person for someone, or let someone be that person for you. Drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Have you ever almost missed something important because you trusted too much? I'd like to know. God bless you, and stay vigilant.